Honorable participants, welcome you to the presentation of the study Municipal Housing Stock in Ukraine, carried out by the Housing Institute with the assistance of UNHCR and Norwegian Refugee Council. We have the online translation going on, including with English translation. So that our translation is available, please use the second line for translation. Everyone who registered for the event on Friday received an email with this material available in Ukrainian and English. I hope you had the opportunity to get familiar with it so that today we can have fruitful discussion on the subject. Also, if you don't have the text, you can use the QR code you see on the screen and download the study. Our presentation is happening both offline and online. Here in this conference room we have representatives of the authorities, gramadas, associations, public and civil society organizations, our partners, and online we have also representatives of local self-government, watched by, I'm sure, all representatives of all local self-government bodies. I would like to give the floor to Deputy Minister for Development of Communities and Territories of Ukraine, Natalia Kozlovska. Thank you, Alina. My greetings, hope you're fine. It's very good that we have the opportunity to discuss the actions carried out by the government and parliament to reform housing policy. I'd like to thank our armed forces that make such efforts possible. On the other hand, I'd like to inform you at what stage of reforming housing policy we are currently, so that you, together with us, are on the same page. I'd like to remind you that the housing reform was provided by the action plan that was approved, which is called Ukraine Facility, and reform in the context of human capital provides for the development of a number of legislative means, among them the draft law on the fundamental principles of housing policy. You know that this draft law is already in place. It was developed together with our international partners with a wide spectrum. It's including European Commission, World Bank, European Bank, International Organization of Migration, Norwegian Refugee Council, UNHCR, Office of European Council, Ukraine. I hope I mentioned everyone. On the other hand, it engaged a wide spectrum of non-government organizations and self-government local bodies who needed understanding how to plan and implement housing policy, so we have the opportunity to have a quality housing stock in Ukraine. As of now, the law which is going to supersede the effective, it's already registered in the Verkhovna Rada, and we have the positive support of the profile committee, and we hope that it will be passed in the first reading. This draft law is innovative, and it lays down the foundation of the principles of the transparent housing policy for every citizen of Ukraine. It aims to create affordable housing through the effective supporting system which takes into account best European practices. Based on the results of adopting this law, we are going to have a lot of work to be done. This is adopting bylaws. There will be about 70 of them, introduction of amendments to existing laws so that they are aligned with the innovative law on the general fundamental principles of housing policy. On the other hand, we need to adopt the law on the social housing stock. It's a very important direction that we have to learn to implement, not only by local self-government bodies, but also for business. It's important to learn how to implement it, because we see that if this is going to be the major means of providing affordable housing to citizens. On the other hand, we need to implement legislation on housing stock management, because it's also part of housing policy to ensure balanced implementation. To reform the housing and adopt housing strategy that will create the framework for change that we need to do to form the housing stock irrespective of whether it's going to be done by business or local self-government authorities or the state bodies. On the other hand, we need to ensure its high-quality management. We will also need to develop the program product that is going to substitute the effective housing queue. And everybody asks the question, what's going to happen to this queue and how the state is going to have the understanding of how many people in the country need improvement of housing conditions. And so draft law gives the answer to these questions through development of the relevant database that will help to identify needs on the one hand, on the other hand to provide parent implementation of the law. I would like to focus on these two words because currently the housing queue, housing registration that is done by various subjects, local authorities, executive authorities, central executive authorities, they cannot provide transparent and quality reflection of the existing needs. So for us, that's a priority. So we need to understand that we match the needs we currently have, real needs. So this is where we are. We hope that Verkhovna Rada will support the draft law in the first reading. We understand that, of course, there will be things that will need to be improved. So we invite everyone to take part in this work. Thank you, Alina. Thank you. Housing-related issues in Gramadas are highly relevant for our members of the parliament, especially in the view of the work done by the Temporary Special Commission on the Protection of IDPs and other conflict-affected people's rights in the context of housing rights. I would like to give the floor to Pavlo Frolov, the head of the Temporary Special Commission. Thank you for invitation. Yes, we in the parliament since 2023 we have the special committee in charge of IDPs and all conflict-affected categories of people. We've already managed to do a lot. Briefly about what we have currently. We have 4.6 million IDPs in Ukraine, and based on Ukrainian expert assessment of Kyiv School of Business, more than 4 million lost their housing. Assessment done by our partners, by the World Bank, European Commission, UN, almost corresponds to that number. So actually we can say that Ukraine needs to address the housing problem for the population of Croatia or half Austria or half of Sweden. So it's just about the scale of the task Ukrainian government faces, that the challenge we all face in the context of housing policy. And it's very important that the parliament has such a special commission. It's not a political body. It includes representatives of all factions. They are represented in the commission, and the key focus of our group is the housing issues. Two laws adopted. I will speak about them briefly. They relate to how to assist Ukrainians, conflict-affected population, IDPs who lost their housing. A very important law initiated by our commission, and it's already in action. It's law number 4080 about conducting national inventory check of all housing stock, of all real estate that can be used for housing, can be used by IDPs and conflict-affected people. All Ukrainians who lost the housing. This law has been in effect since the 5th of March, so the Cabinet of Ministers is finalizing bylaws, and this law provides for two layers of commissions, one on the level of Oblast administration and district administration, with the mandatory engagement of local self-government bodies, municipalities, engagement of non-government organization, and it provides for a physical inspection of all real estate objects. This includes also land plots, just land plots that are free, which can be used for fast building of housing for conflict-affected people. We can include incomplete housing objects here, so that can be quickly completed. So we're going to look for mechanisms to engage such incomplete objects so we can very quickly complete them and give them to the IDPs. So the Commission is going to take inventory to inspect the technical state of each object. In the state register, we have 26,000 of housing units in Ukraine. So the oblast administrations already have these numbers, and as soon as the bylaws are ready, the commissions will start working. We have to fix the technical state. We have to understand how many investments we need for what number of housing units. This law was discussed at various events conducted by our commission at forum involving our partners, UNHCR, Norwegian Refugee Council, UN Habitat, and other international organizations. In the process of developing this law, we engage these organizations so that they share their housing solutions with us. It's very important that we have very many international and national organizations that are willing to help Ukrainians in this part. It's important to share best practices so that we can see the whole menu of possible decisions and solutions. And dear colleagues, the study we are presenting today, conducted by the Housing Institute, it is highly important because our commission also was engaged so that Hramadas could provide information necessary for the study. We know that not all Hramadas provided data necessary for that study. We know that it's not good, but I'd like to highlight that this problem cannot be solved, addressed solely by the central power or international organization. We need joint efforts of all actors, and engagement of local communities is extremely important. Engagement of every local council, of every local Hromada, because Hromadas have much more opportunities, much more authority to realize which housing objects can be very quickly used, completed, to provide housing to IDPs and conflict-affected people. And in conclusion, yes, we are looking forward to the presentation. It's very important to hear the current situation with municipal housing stock. I'd like to say that the Parliament supports the reform of housing legislation, as Deputy Minister said. Our Commission also supported this draft law. So it's on the agenda, one of the nearest sessions of the Parliament. We still don't know the date, but we need to very quickly adopt the law, because our out-of-date legislation is a great barrier on the way of engaging more financial resources of international organizations, banks. I mean such banks as World Bank, European Investment Bank, and other investors who are ready to help, but they need the adequate legal framework. Thank you for the invitation, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you, Pavlo. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Housing Institute, to thank our speakers, the Temporary Special Commission, the Ministry, for your support during our work on this study, during data collection and developing all. And I'd like to thank you for all activities you're doing to address critical issues in the housing sector of Ukraine, especially addressing problems of IDPs and conflict-affected people. Let's thank our speakers. And let's get down to the presentation itself. I'd like to invite here my co-authors. I'd like to invite here my co-authors, everyone who worked on this fundamental document. It's Isaac Robinson, author's team lead. Katerina Olinik, Real Estate Legal Department Manager, Ernst Young, and Mikhaila Prichodko, Ernst Young partner in Ukraine. I'm waiting for you here on the stage. Our authors group is much larger, so we engaged many more experts. So I'd like to thank all the authors and experts on this document. Among them, above all, Ruslan Kalinin, Yuri Sukhanos, Larisa Grechenko, Bogdan Malnev, and Valentina Lyshenyuk. On behalf of the entire team, I'd like to thank our territorial Hromadas for their engagement, and I'd like to thank the Association of Ukrainian Cities and the All Ukrainian Association of Communities who assisted in data collection and communication with Hromadas. Municipal housing stock is the backbone of the housing sector in most European countries. However, the Housing Code of Ukraine does not even include the concept of communal housing stock, that is, the housing owned by communities, despite the completed decentralization reform. At the same time, municipal housing stock should be inherently linked to the social housing stock, as social housing as a mechanism of housing allocation can be an additional form supplementing various types of housing ownership. That is why in this study we can see these terms repeatedly used side by side. The aim of this study is to provide practical recommendations that will help local self-government bodies and donors identify innovative approaches to expanding and developing municipal housing stock. To conduct this study, digital questionnaires with 58 questions were shared with all existing 1,469 Hromadas in Ukraine. Responses were received from 710 Hromadas, and that information laid the foundation of our study. Our team double-checked all responses received from Hromadas using open sources and using telephone communication with each Hromada, all 710 of them, and we also had personal meetings. Of course, we didn't have the chance to have personal meetings with each Hromada, but we talked on phone with absolutely all Hromadas that gave information. Based on the results, we chose 13 Hromadas for qualitative engagement and for giving recommendations. So the authorities and donors were recommended to take a close look at these Hromadas. You see these Hromadas on the screen. These Hromadas were selected based on their diverse capacity, geographical representation, and demonstrated involvement in housing-related initiatives. I'd like to assure you that representatives of several of these Hromadas are today in this conference room. Those who could not join offline are watching us online. These are the following Hromadas: Bravarska, Makarivska, Khmelnytska, Kovilska from Volyn Oblast, Perechynska, Transcarpathian Oblast, Vinnytska, Rakitnivska, Rivne Oblast, Milchinska, Zhytomyr Oblast, Vradivska, Mykolaiv Oblast, Kelmenetska, Chernivtsi Oblast, Kaluska, Ivano-Frankivska Oblast, Yampilska, Vinnytsia Oblast, and Konotopska, Sumy Oblast. The data received from Hromadas demonstrate how deep-rooted is the housing crisis in Ukraine. On the one hand, post-independence privatization of housing made most households owners of the housing, but on the other hand, it depleted and degraded the state and municipal housing stock, making it impossible to develop social housing as part of the municipal stock. The aging housing stock and the lack of mechanisms for maintaining common areas have led to deterioration in housing conditions, a particularly acute problem given that almost half of the population in Ukraine lives today in multi-family blocks of flats. Rural-urban migration driven by post-independence factory closures in rural areas has created an acute mismatch in housing supply, with urban areas experiencing shortages of housing and rural areas left with an excess of housing. There are a lot of private houses that are abandoned by their owners in rural areas and not used by local authorities. While housing policies have traditionally focused on ownership, the government has invested minimally in developing new housing stock. The private sector, weakened by the 2008 financial crisis, has been unable to adequately address the gap. Local self-governments responsible for social housing have not delivered meaningful results, and outdated Soviet-era legislation has stifled innovation in the sector. Since 1991, Ukraine's focus has been on stimulating the free market rather than developing mechanisms to ensure long-term public housing solutions. Despite all challenges, overcoming pain and obstacles, our hromadas continue to function. The survey that we conducted aimed to obtain information about the barriers faced by hromadas in addressing housing issues, focusing on financial, procedural, and structural aspects. The respondents were also asked to assess the severity of the various barriers. This approach provided insight into the most critical barriers. Among them, the lack of funding is, according to our self-government bodies, is the most pressing problem. 84% of hromadas identified it as a level 5 problem in terms of severity. Bureaucratic barriers, while less critical than funding issues, are still significant. 27% of the respondents rated them as a level 4 problem. Legal obstacles further complicate the situation. 36% of the hromadas perceive these problems at level 3 and 29% at level 4. These figures illustrate the persistent and multifaceted legal complexities that hinder housing development. Moreover, a lack of expertise within hromadas exacerbates these challenges. 37% of respondents identified it as level 2 problem, and that means that capacity gaps and limited technical knowledge significantly undermine efforts to address housing stock issues effectively. A critical barrier to the expansion of social housing lies in the limited technical capacity of local self-government bodies to manage and develop housing initiatives. Hromadas lack dedicated personnel with expertise in housing policy, public-private partnerships, international funding, and investments. This absence of institutional knowledge hampers the ability of local governments to navigate complex legal processes, secure necessary funding, or engage in long-term housing projects. The graph that you see shows that about 60% of the hromadas have more than 50 staff. This concentration of medium and large organizations indicates some resource potential that can be mobilized, but it also highlights the need for targeted strategies to address the uneven distribution of these resources. The following graph also shows the number of hromada employees involved in housing-related activities. It should be interpreted with the understanding that these employees include those involved in all types of housing-related activities, including management of the housing stock. As it can be seen, 58% of hromadas have quite a small housing-related staff. In most cases, it's just 1 or 2 people in a local self-government authority. These data indicate an acute shortage of housing professionals, which significantly limits the ability of local self-government bodies to manage complex processes of housing stock transfer, develop municipal housing programs, or implement strategic decisions. In addition, 183 out of 710 gramadas indicated that they have municipal companies, institutions specializing in the field of housing, which constitutes only 26% of the whole number. And out of these 183 gramadas, only 15 gramadas reported that they have more than 2 such municipal companies. And this is just 2% of all gramadas. Only 2% have more than one communal companies or institutions in the field of housing. This indicates a certain potential of municipalities, but even these 26% of gramadas will be under stress in the coming years due to the cancellation of the Commercial Code of Ukraine and the need for gradual corporatization of state and municipal companies. As all state and municipal unitary companies are to be transformed into joint stock companies or limited liability companies 100% owned by gramadas. This means that the implementation of housing projects in gramadas will be complicated by bureaucratic processes related to legislative changes. The lack of institutional readiness also reflects in the implementation of housing programs. Only 16% of gramadas reported having any housing programs in place, and the majority, is 86%, as you see in the graph, lack any initiatives or programs. Among the implemented programs, temporary housing for IDPs dominates at 42%, and it is followed by a rural housing initiative called Own House, 27%. In your opinion, how many gramadas have local housing strategies or some concepts or strategic documents? 0. Budgetary allocation for social housing remains minimal today, and this, as you see in the slide, this reflects both limited resources and the lack of prioritization by local self-government bodies. Many gramadas allocate the bulk of their housing budgets to temporary housing or emergency repairs rather than investing in long-term social housing stock. Analysis of budgetary allocations under Budget Code 1060 reveals that housing expenditures account for less than 2% of total budgets. We assessed all 710 gramadas against open resources. We verified the data provided by gramadas by manual verification against open resources against this budget code, and we identified that out of 710 assessed gramadas, only 48 gramadas had expenditures under Code 1060, and that is less than 7% of all gramadas. As you see, we assessed years 2023 and 2024. And the most painful slide here, in the survey the main question was, and the question that we posed before gramadas, we asked them to name the number of residential real estate objects of communal ownership in the gramada. Our team made many attempts to obtain this data. We used a general questionnaire that we shared, a questionnaire explaining what residential real estate object of communal ownership means, explaining what residential object means, what communal ownership means, what property means. With every gramada, we had phone conversations, we explained them these terms, we advised them, we consulted, and the final result we got still causes concern for our team. And this is the reason why the statistics you see on the screen in red is not included in the final text of our study. The biggest problem is the impossibility to do desk assessment of the number of properties. The problem is, what exactly is a property object as a unit? Hromadas cannot identify it. Sometimes they do not have this data on paper. Although we ask to count the number of flats and rooms in dormitories as units, most hromadas simply do not have this data. The number you see on this in the slide, it may include, according to our assessment, both flats in blocks of flats, multi-family buildings, as well as housing units. So hromadas do not have specific data about the number of flats in blocks of flats. And this figure of 68,916 housing units means that only 67% of these housing units are habitable, according to what hromadas reported. So our assessment is that until implementation of Law 4080 on the National Inventory of Real Estate, until we have clear and transparent criteria for such inventory check, hromadas will not have digitized results that we can rely on. Historically, another significant obstacle has been the failure to transfer so-called departmental housing to communal ownership. Departmental housing is residential real estate that historically belonged to state-owned enterprises and ministries during the Soviet Union. These properties were intended for employees, but after the collapse of the USSR, their legal status became ambiguous. Pursuant to the 1992 law of Ukraine on privatization of the state housing stock, more than 5 million flats and houses of the departmental housing stock were transferred to individual ownership, which accounted for 95% of the state housing stock. Today, no one has reliable data on the size of the departmental housing stock or the number of flats that are still not privatized. The flats where people continue living, the factual owners, but their ownership has not been documentally supported. They haven't used their right to privatization. Our study nevertheless shows that the departmental housing stock is still very meaningful. This unclaimed or poorly managed stock represents a significant missed opportunity for expanding municipal housing. Almost all local self-government bodies that participated in the face-to-face focus group discussions expressed interest in exploring innovative housing solutions, including partnerships with private market actors. However, few could provide examples of specific steps taken to pursue such ideas, could give specific examples of what they have done during the time to attract donors and potential investors. Representatives from several hromadas said that they fear the scrutiny, they fear inspections, and this fear before the fear of law enforcement bodies discourages hromadas from engaging in initiatives that are not clearly defined by effective legislation. That means that if we say that what is not prohibited is allowed, it raises concern of our local self-government bodies. They ask us to provide on the central level that they can do this. What does it demonstrate? It demonstrates the absence of the true spirit of self-governance, and that means that local self-government bodies do not know how to handle abandoned, unclaimed or disputed real estate. While central government departments are often blamed for the problems, it is equally important to question how assertively hromadas themselves act. According to Transparency International, the housing and land sectors rank among the most corruption-prone areas in Ukraine. Ukraine ranks 104th out of 180 countries according to International Corruption Perception Index. This represents an improvement from previous years, but at the same time indicates that the problems remain, persistent challenges remain. Our study revealed the following examples of corrupt practices: illegal privatization of municipal housing stock, withdrawal of housing from the category of departmental housing to enable its privatization, provision of housing for use and ownership to individuals for a certain remuneration, or transfer of such housing to relatives and close friends related to people working in self-government bodies. Another problem is manipulation of housing queues and bribery. Also, embezzlement of funds allocated for housing renovations, leading to incomplete or substandard projects. These and other examples undermine public trust and discourage potential donors and investors from participating in housing initiatives. As part of our study, we analyzed all existing housing programs and mechanisms, all effective projects and solutions effective in Ukraine, and you can find all of them in the annex to our study. And I'd like to give the floor to my co-author, Real Estate Legal Department Manager Ernst Young, Katerina Olinik. Thank you, Alina. Dear participants, colleagues, and partners, I'm very happy to be part of the team who conducted such large-scale and complex research about municipal housing stock. We've analyzed the great number of legal acts, laws, and housing programs with the main aim. We wanted to understand how currently the system of providing housing in Ukraine functions, what are the strong sides and what are the weaknesses of the current system. We'll understand that the housing right is a constitutional right of Ukrainian citizens. It's not just a political declaration, it's a norm of direct action, and to implement this norm, we have many housing projects that are delivered by the state, by municipalities, and all these programs aimed to give a person the possibility to obtain housing, or to provide mortgage programs, or support in some way the building of housing by the people who need it. There are long-term support programs. So people who need social protection, they need to be provided with housing on conditions that suit their needs and situation. All these programs were implemented as a response to certain challenges during the implementation of the housing strategy, but we also understood that most programs have fragmentary, temporary character. Many of them are not effective anymore. They are actually dead, and the most acute problem is the shortage of the housing stock. Due to some historical mirrors, uncontrolled privatization of the housing, due to some other reasons. This happened due to different reasons, but the result is that local self-government bodies do not have physical possibilities to to meet people's needs for social housing or temporary housing. And this is especially critical in our situation of ongoing military conflict. We understand that in spite of the spectrum of programs, we need to focus on where to get available housing stock, how to form this housing stock, how to fund it, how to engage funds, including from investors and private capital, etc. As neither program can be effective if it is not supported by a real housing stock and real funding. During our study, we analyzed and identified that there is a lot of housing that hasn't been registered with municipalities. It's not, it hasn't been registered, it's not been officially transferred. There is a lot of housing stock that during a reconstruction or functional alteration can serve as a housing stock for IDPs, for example. As we already said, there are vacant land plots that where housing can be built using mechanism of housing cooperatives or other mechanisms. All these can be utilized as a source for forming municipal housing stock. Currently, we need to implement the single approach, understandable legal framework procedures, because we also understood that through mismatch of all these effective government programs, there are various criteria and various access rules for the same categories of people. In some cases, we have various living space a person can be eligible for is prescribed by different programs. Now I'd like to give the floor to our partner Mikhaila Prihodko now. Hello, dear colleagues. By way of conclusion, I'd like to say that our analysis focused on a legal component, but its results sum up what my colleagues have already highlighted. And so, no matter how good the legislation is, if we do not have supporting mechanisms, we can do nothing, and because the housing stock is limited, the funding is limited. So the question is how we can upscale the number of housing stock that can be created or can be upgraded or can be made available to Ukrainians so that it can be effectively used. And accordingly, we need to understand the mechanisms how to do it, because if we engage private-state partnership, that is a possible mechanism. Then back to limited possibilities, limited technical expertise that Gromadas have to implement such projects. How can we empower them to implement such projects? We need pilot projects to show how these mechanisms can be implemented. And when we're going to upscale, we will face the issue of effective management of the housing stock. Now we need to do the inventory check to understand the state of the current housing stock, and this is a big issue that we have to handle. Thank you, Katerina and Mikhaila, and I'd like to thank Ernst & Young team in Ukraine who worked on that study. I'd like to give the floor to our team lead and executive director of the Center for Durable Solution Dialogue, Isaac Robinson. It was a challenge for our team how to develop practical recommendations that will be usable for local self-government bodies, international donors, central authorities in their work with housing stock. So I invite Isaac to highlight our recommendations developed by our team.
I prefer to stand. Yeah, as probably she mentioned, like I represent the Center for Durable Solution, and it has been an honor to actually lead this work, quite important work. But I want to reflect on the humanitarian institutional knowledge, because this is not a discussion that we started today. There has been a discussion for the last 10 years. I know that because I have been in this country working for the last 10 years. So in 2015, I was leading a UNHCR funded project to build a legal network across the country. And under that program, the UNHCR program, we had the first major HLP study in December 2015. In 2016, my former employer, Danish Refugee Council, had a lot of discussion on housing. Like we had 20 briefing notes, we had training of 200 people, we had workshop, we even had a housing fair in Kiev in 2016. It was a housing fair, and it was looking at different options of the housing at that time. In 2017-18, UNHCR had 2 housing programs in Kharkiv, and then Sasha is here, and then after 18, Sasha had tremendous work, they had a housing unit. So And since 2018, we had multiple INGOs, DRCP, not UNHCR, Caritas, IOM, they're all pursuing housing program opportunities until the war started. So the reason I'm telling this is that what we're discussing today in the study is actually a build-up of the discussion we had for 10 years. And to have that institutional knowledge is very important. Sometimes when I talk about those history, people say, oh, hell, Diadeshka has started to play the broken record again. But that broken record is really, really important because that's how you know actually what had worked, what didn't work, and why it didn't work. And when I say why it didn't work, think about this way. Elena presented that most of the grandmothers said that funding is a category 5 problem. I'd say like, okay, that's a perception of the grandmothers. That's a perception. But I would say that's half true. Who is going to fund a housing program if he is not comfortable on the legislative framework and on the accountability, on the institutional setup of the country? Because housing is a high price item. High price item project spans over multiple years. You're talking about a minimum of 2 to 5 years to implement a housing program. So whoever is funding a housing program is exposing himself and his donor for 2 to 5 years and exposing on actors whom he doesn't control. There's one thing that's like an NFI distribution. You can have a very smart design of program, install checks and balance, distribute that, you're out. And you control those actors. But housing is not NFI distribution. You have to depend on multiple actors, national government actors, local government actors, external private actors, and any of them do anything wrong, you are exposed, your reputation is exposed. You have procession in your capitals that what you're doing with my money, what you're doing with my taxpayers' money, right? So this is one of the reasons that you have to reflect on. Is funding a problem or is funding an outcome of other problems? So we had looked the study from those different angles, like, okay, funding is a problem, but it may be also an outcome of other problems. And what are those problems? Imagine like if you have to build a housing program, so you have to first take care of the legitimate concerns of your donors. And what are the concerns? Like first thing is like, let's have a legislative framework because without the framework, you cannot implement. Let's have the institutional framework. Without the institutional framework, you don't have the institution to work on those. Then you are concerned about transparency and accountability. And for that, you have to look into the local government, the grandmothers. Do they have the willingness? Do they have the capacity to do that? Once you know that they have the willingness, they have the capacity, then you look into like, how do I build in a checks and balance mechanism? And the checks and balance mechanism, you don't want to give it to the implementer. You don't want to give it to the grandmothers. You want an independent entity. So that's why you want the local CBOs to come up for this checks and balance mechanism, right? But if today you call the grandmothers, how many grandmothers will tell that they have a CBO or CSO which knows what's the difference between housing and shelter, which knows what is adequate housing standards, who knows what is inclusivity, which knows what is transparency and accountability, anti-corruption. You don't find those NGOs there. You don't find the lawyers there, right? So these are the problems that donors will face. And our whole idea of the study was to look deep in there and then see like, what can we do to unlock that? What can we do to remove those obstacles? You know, like this building is beautiful, but nobody talks here about the spade and shovels or the hammer and the things. Those are not important today at all. But without that, nobody will dare building this house. Because without those infrastructure, you can build a thing. And the same thing for the housing program. You have to first take care of the soft infrastructure. You build the soft infrastructure, and suddenly you will see that all the powerful actors who have been sidelined, they are coming back because their confidence is back and they can implement projects accountable and transparent way. So this is the first part of my scaring you speech, But the next part is like what we are recommending to do that. We didn't recommend that let's have a program because program is something that many people can do. Local government can do, the donors can do. It's for two reasons we didn't look into program. One is that each municipality is different. They have different realities. They have the economic realities, they have a displacement reality, they have the gender-based realities. So that uniqueness is very difficult for a foreigner like me. So I think like a foreigner like us shouldn't be doing a design from Kiev and say like, this is how you do your housing program. Those should come from the ground. So the more we can have organic growth, the more we can have grassroots initiative is better, because in that way the program will be more custom tailored to the need of the people, right? So this is one of the reasons that we didn't give models, like this is X, Y, Z model and implement that. Instead of that, what we focused on is like, how can we create the soft infrastructure so that the donors and others have the confidence in starting the thing. So I will come back to one after one. So in terms of the regulatory framework, I would say the regulatory framework, the legislative and regulatory framework is pretty bad. Everybody accept that. And the minister and the lawmaker, Pablo, also discussing that it is a work being done. So we have waited for 10 years. It was not done in 10 years. So how do we know that it will be done in another 10 years? But we trust them. And I think you can say like this is a different time and then we are more focused, we'll do that. But if we do that, it can take 2-3 years. Or it cannot be complete in the first stage. We may have to wait for a longer period to have all those things done, right? So do we wait for the legislative framework to be completed before we engage? No, because in that way, first of all, it can be delayed. Secondly, we may not like that. Thirdly, it may have many holes which we cannot fix. So we are back to square zero, that nothing is going to happen. So what we want to propose is a very radical idea. It's called self-regulation. Some of you know that the self-regulation had been used by many countries. Developing countries are using that because their legislative and institutional framework are not good, so there are private initiatives in self-regulation. Even the developed countries are doing self-regulation. For example, in UK, the advertisement standard is self-regulated. In USA, you know FINRA, which is the Financial Regulatory Authority, is self-regulated. And I tell you the beauty of self-regulation. I come from Bangladesh. The Bangladesh garments industry is self-regulated. 40 years ago, Bangladesh GDP was 1/10 of Ukraine's GDP. And the garment sector was zero, literally zero. In 40 years, Bangladesh is number 2 in garments. If you check your shirt tag, there's a 50% chance that's made in Bangladesh. It's in that stage. And that's where the self-regulation played a massive role, because the government was regulating, the industry is like, let's regulate by ourselves. Let's have private rules, we follow those rules, and suddenly you get a certification that you have actually followed those rules, and the donors get confidence that no, there is no violation of labor rights, there is a standard safety procedure for the workers and other kind of stuff. People started to invest. So this is exactly what we are proposing for the housing sector. If the government regulation comes, very good. That will be complementarity. But we don't base our action based on that will come and that will be okay. So we create our own self-regulation, and this is a voluntary commitment of the gramadas. This is incentive-based. The gramadas, if they want to stay away from the regulation, very good. But if you participate in that regulation, you get a certification. And the moment you get a certification, then you get the confidence of the donor that the background has been checked. The donors don't need to go to each gramada and check X, Y, Z every time. They can only rely on the certification that somebody authentic and somebody who has the qualification has done that certification for us, right? So how it will be implemented, it can be implemented a different way. We can talk about that. So one idea is like we can have a steering committee of development actors, IGOs, INGOs, the big housing players, and then have a team. And the team will have a standard of certification. For example, what is the procurement policy? What is the inclusivity policy? What is the anti-corruption policy? What is the grievance redressal mechanism policy? What is the whatever, checks and balance mechanism. So you have all those standards, and each standards have defined rules, and then you allow the grandmothers to participate in that, and then you have an inspection team. The inspection team goes to grandmother and then checks if they have complied with those standards. You give a certification, and you do the inspection on a yearly basis so that the grandmothers keep standing on the certification on a yearly basis. Now, you can say, like, if you're a grandmother, and so, like, it's a very tough thing. Like, we will not be able to comply with those very rigid things. But that's not the full story. We can have separate service provider who will help you to actually comply. That's where another important ancillary service comes in, which is like training center. There are 1,469 grandmothers in this country. On average, if one grandmother needs one lawyer who knows all the housing laws and procedure and the international best practices, then there is 1,469 qualified people needed in the country, in the housing sector, right? Do you have that? So you can have a training program which can have a certification program on the housing. It can be a 3 months, 6 months short course. And then once that training is done, the grandmothers knows that the guy I am appointed, he knows the work. It's not that my brother-in-law or somebody else that I hired, but he has that training for the institutions. So if the grandmother cannot comply with the certification process, the grandmother can take help from the lawyer. The grandmother can get to another NGOs and they say, like, can you second a lawyer to my grandmother so that I can actually qualify for those processes and then get certification. So this is, I'm telling it in very short, but we have detailed it much more. I'll spend another 3 minutes. So that is the certification process that we have that takes care of the lack of legislative and institutional framework, because we intend to build that from the ground. Then the other thing is, like, as I said, like grassroots initiatives. Like, you go to the grandmothers and then you will hear many people like brilliant ideas. We can do this, that, and that kind of thing. And all those ideas die. And they die for a very natural reason. I'm a program manager for 25 years. I know how painful it is to mature an idea into a concept into a proposal into fundable project, and then the fundable project to be implemented. It's a big development curve that you have to do. And do you expect a youth from a grandmother to go through all those things? So this is where all the creative ideas from the grandmother die. And what survive is a program design like a foreigner like me who says, like, this and this and this, implement that. So we want to change that. We want these grassroots ideas to actually come to project level and get implemented. How do we do that? We are proposing that let's have a housing incubation center. And the purpose of the incubation center is to take the ideas and then walk it through all the process and mature it as a implementable project. How do you do that? Just an example. You have a hackathon, for example. You have a 5-day hackathon in Kiev or Kharkiv or anywhere else, and you invite the grandmothers, and you tell the grandmothers that send me 3 teams, 3-member team. And each team should have 1 youth, 1 woman, and 1 at least civil society representative and 1 your representative. And then when the 3-member team comes, for example, in Kiev, 100 team comes from 100 grandmother, right? The first 3 days, you train them on housing law. You train them on project cycle management. You train them good practice and bad practices. You train them on what is the reality in Ukraine. You train them on the funding perspective. This is the first 3 days, so all the team knows what it is. On the 4th day, you appoint a coach for them. The coach will help them design a project. So this concept becomes a project, right? On the 5th day, you ask all these 100 teams to present in the hackathon, 10 minutes presentation. And you have a judge made of all the conventional donors who are interested in a housing project, INGOs who are interested in implementing housing project. So those guys actually judge the projects, and you select 10 projects from there. So you see, you are actually refining the INGOs, the project cycle development, by participation of the entire country, the youth, women, the community, the grassroots ideas come here and then matures as a implementable projects. And some of the projects, after the 5 years, probably are not ready to be implemented because it still needs work. Then you can go back to the housing service provider and say, like, can I have an accelerative service? Housing acceleration service, 3 months of housing acceleration service, so that those selected 10 projects gets the SOP done. It gets the risk analysis. It gets a playbook done. So these are the examples we are saying that how do we make sure that the ideas from the ground actually come up. The last thing, 1 minute, transparency and accountability. You know, when I was checking Google, I found that Ukraine is number 1 in blockchain. The land system is on blockchain. The voting system is going to be in blockchain, and many other things is going to be blockchain. We should have that blockchain thing in the housing system, because one of the source of corruption is documents are erased. Documents cannot be tracked. A blockchain gives you that immutability, and it's cheap, it's immutable, and that can be one way of reducing corruption. I had a lot of things, but I think I don't have time, but I think we'll have many other opportunities to talk. Thank you very much.
Ukraine Inform platform is small for Isaac, but let's thank our co-authors, the whole authors team, everyone who was engaged in the project. I'd like to get down to the next block, to our next discussion, but first of all, let's express our gratitude, as all participants will have the opportunity after the next block to communicate, to ask questions to the authors of the study. I'd like to invite the following speakers, representatives of international organizations cooperating with our gramadas and supporting them in the development of housing stock. They are Evgeny Kriskunov, Counselor for Housing, UNHCR, Arhan Aliyev, Sergei Pezhov, expert on social housing, Caritas Ukraine, and Viktor Gladchenko, head of the recovery housing program, People in Need. I will ask Evgen to start our discussion, to share about the UNHCR potential, as UNHCR is the major partner, thanks to which this study was possible, was made public. So I'd like Evgen to start. Thank you very much for this honor to represent the organization which is engaged to such important research, and using this opportunity that we have here, municipalities, I'd like to remind everyone where we can cooperate with municipalities, where we have the space for cooperation, where we see our role on the central level. So I'd like to highlight 3 major blocks where we are actively engaged in the context of housing. Currently we have air attacks, so NHCR has a network of partners in all areas and gramadas of Ukraine who can within an hour respond and have shelter emergency units which can help people to preserve their housing and do emergency repairs with high quality. Starting from February 2022, 190,000 households received such assistance, and 1,890 of civil, social, non-residential buildings received this assistance, mostly educational institutions from nursery schools to universities, and we believe that it's also very important that because one time gramadas will start rehabilitating all these institutions, they will start functioning, so it's important to preserve them as much as possible in the best condition for the future so that we can reduce future expenses. The second big block of our assistance is housing repairs. These are construction materials, cash assistance for repairs, and complete repair. We work with individual properties, but we also expand our assistance concerning common areas in blocks of flats. And you see on the screen the roof, the windows, and other repair works that our contractors do. And we see there is a big scale of work for the future. We also offer for the individuals who lost housing, it's completely destroyed, but they didn't want to abandon their land. They dream about renovation of their housing, rebuilding, so they need a temporary solution until they find the financial solutions. We offer modular houses with maximum available comfort, and starting since 2023, more than 280 of such modular house we already provided. We have a pilot project in Konotop Gramada in Sumy Oblast. We have that there is a need of IDP families, and together with the local Gramada we built a mini town with houses for IDPs. The third block, if we talk about IDPs, since February 2022, more than 236 collective centers and objects of social infrastructure have been repaired by us. It's more than 24,000 units for IDPs and 570 individual houses for IDPs were rehabilitated with our funds. So that is the local level. We are represented across Ukraine. We have 4 local offices that are marked with, on the map. We have the regions. So we have the Western, Central, and Northern, East, and South, which takes into account the specificity of the territories. We have our national offices. All the programs I've been talking about today, they are all realized on the level of our field or regional offices. They are implementing them together with contractors, partners. Our national office coordinates this work, defines methodology, and cooperates with the central government. And here we would like to say that capacity building on the local level and on the central level is also something we can be proud of, and in the study that we present today, it reflects this work, and that includes legal services in the reform being discussed. These are the services and engagement in the creation of the unified digital database of housing for IDPs. Besides, our partners on the ground help local gramadas by advising people who have damaged housing or destroyed housing, so they advise them how to get compensation from the state. So today we heard that on the local level that there is not enough expertise on the local level, and here this is where we step in as well. So thank you for this opportunity to share, and we are looking for new opportunities for collaboration. Thank you. And we thank the whole UNHCR team for your work. I'm drawing the attention of gramadas who are watching us online. So here on the slide you see the contacts and the center you can contact according to the territory where you are in. So you can contact these UNHCR offices in Ukraine. Now I'd like to give the floor to Arhan Aliyev, Director of Habitat of Humanity in Ukraine.
great pleasure to talk about habitat experience in housing sector in Ukraine. So we are globally known for building houses, especially in the post-war scenarios. So in Ukraine, it's probably we are first ever as an organization that we entered the country to start building better homes for people still having struggled to find decent homes. I will structure my speech in about giving what we do in generally and give you examples from our experience in Kalush city of Ivano-Frankivsk, which probably give you much better understanding generally about concept and believe why social housing is very important, how we can use municipality stock in general for these purposes. So we work in three main pillars. And first pillar is about building better and decent homes in Ukraine. And here we mean mostly improving and providing different housing solutions. And second is about how we can repurpose or transform abandoned or damaged houses for living purposes. And third is about improving energy efficiency of multi-apartment buildings, especially for those who are asset poor. And here, I share the concern of my fellow colleagues, that's very important that how we build the soft component of it, building knowledge and supply side and the capacity for construction companies, especially in the areas where they can reuse of construction waste in different rebuilding and rehabilitation areas of Ukraine. That's the first pillar. And second pillar, we focus on more of transforming the housing system. We work very closely with the government and also with the local NGOs, with gromadas, with the municipality to really find out what are the best options for people, especially those who are very vulnerable. And here I'm not only mean IDPs, but also those who are in need of housing, because this sector has been shattered very much by the war, and the housing-related problems existed before the war. Simply the war exacerbated the situation. And why we need to transform and work with the government so that we can really build also very affordable systems or mechanisms for people to access to finance. So who really want to rent, who really want to take mortgage, or who really want to simply get credit to repair. So these are the different options that we're thinking about how we can really reform the sector. And third pillar is about inspire for sustainable housing. It's more about awareness. It's not awareness from the governmental level, more awareness about community levels. They understand their rights and they also really engage in a more inclusive housing system development. So I'm coming back to the example of what we are doing in Ukraine in a Kalush city. So we have recently started a project which we call Kohati. This is a project is about transforming abandoned kindergarten into livable, decent homes for about 150 people. And most of them will be IDPs. And the purpose we do is it's a pilot project, and we really want to see how we can really use municipal property, transform it, and give it to the benefit of our people, but also manage it. But again, the challenges exist very much. So what we did, we worked with a partner, Metalab, probably have heard about them, and we created a separate charitable organization called Kohati, and we had the agreement with the government of Kalush municipality to get this property, not the land, property for 10-year lease act. So meaning that for the 10 year, we are allowed to really manage the property after we reconstruct it. So, and again, we also had another agreement with them for about a year to do engineering part of it, reconstruct, repurpose, do all the retrofitting of the building so it will be a livable place for people to accommodate. So, but again, the system is that how we're going to manage it after we complete the construction for it, that's a big challenge. And this will probably be one of the few social models we want to show the government as well how we do it. I just give you an example of Bosnia, which also really struggled a lot after the war or damage of Yugoslavia. And what they did initially is that they also didn't have any social housing policy at all, because most of Bosnia and Balkan countries are very most focus of higher home ownership level. But also there was a transition to the more social rental policy gradually, which took about 10-15 years. But again, that's policies that now at the moment they're implementing. And in Ukraine, it's more about the mind shift, which will also take a time. And people who are also lost their homes, that come to Ukraine, find a new house, whether they're going to buy it or going to rent it, that's a very question mark. Probably the renting, especially social renting, will be a priority for them because the fear of losing house will remain. So therefore, for them, giving a kind of option where they can really rent safely with the security, inclusivity, and with a kind of insurance that they can really find another option as a country, another region of Ukraine, gives much more hope in general. So, but again, that for us is also kind of a learning path. But what we want to understand at the moment, and also what Habitat is advocating for, is that social policy is not at the moment a luxury, but a necessity. And this social housing is very, very important just to bridge the gap between emergency shelter and a permanent housing. And also very important is how we're going to build a social rental system in general. And that's also quite a bigger question mark for me. So what kind of system should be in place? We do understand that there are two organizations in Ukraine, Держмолоджитло, Укрfinžitlo, they're providing different type of options. However, they are not really very, very affordable options, to be honest, in general. So we need to kind of revisit the policies as well, to what extent we can really reform this policy, especially for those who are very, very vulnerable and really want to have a decent home. So that's where I want to pose, but I'm happy to hear your questions. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. The next is the speaker from Caritas Ukraine, Sergei Pezhov, expert in social housing, Caritas Ukraine. Thank you, Alina. Dear colleagues, thank you for the invitation, for the opportunity to discuss one of the most pressing issues in Ukraine, provision of affordable housing for conflict-affected people and IDPs. Due to the conflict, 2,000 families are left without, thousands of families were left without any housing, and so the municipalities need to take immediate actions and strategic approach. So our organization, Caritas Ukraine, is actively involved in supporting short-term and long-term housing solutions. Caritas Ukraine is a network of local organizations in Ukraine. It's one of the biggest Ukrainian NGOs which is helping people who need this help. And based on our mission to help the most vulnerable populations, Caritas Ukraine is giving a comprehensive support to those in need and involves complex human-centered approach in its activity, optimizing helping vulnerable population to navigate the crisis. Since the first days of large-scale invasion, we launched the housing support program, which encompasses a large scale of help. 18 teams were launched for emergency repairs. We also provide and assist people with long-term solutions that help IDPs to integrate in their host communities. Our organization implements our programs in close connection with many other organizations, and such complex approach allows us to assess people's needs and raise effectiveness of our systems. We not only give financial support and technical expertise, but we are also developing strategical documents in the housing field, and one of the major directions in implementing housing programs that match energy efficiency criteria and innovative approaches. All projects of our organizations take into account strategic look. We want not just to meet the housing needs, but also create conditions for people's resilience, helping people to find employment and giving them access to social and other necessary services. This complex approach defines whether IDPs will get integrated in the new communities, whether they will be able to build their future in Ukraine or they will have to leave the country. During our monitor visits to communities, our representatives report that gramadas have enough objects that can be used to house IDPs. These are dormitories, nursery schools, medical facilities, and local housing stock. I'd like to support the importance of creating the database on municipal housing and its technical state. We already have Law 4080 on creation the register of affordable housing for IDPs, but implementation is going slowly. This law will give the opportunity to reduce the time for implementation of projects aimed at providing housing to IDPs, especially in the context of finding the objects, collecting primary information about such objects, inspecting their technical condition, and documenting it. If we speak about systematization of data about the house stock for IDPs, such inventory check and such data will give us the complete picture that can be relied on in realization of our programs. We, on our part, as representatives of international organizations, we have our engineering teams, and we are ready to take part in the inspection committees that will inspect housing for IDPs, and we are ready to facilitate the filling of this database with reliable data. The next step after forming the register of accessible house stock, we need to develop the mechanism of allocation, which needs to be transparent. In view of what I said, I'd like to highlight that local communities must be more active in the analysis and inventory of the available housework and its management. Cooperation between state and non-state, non-government organizations is a guarantee of effective solutions in the housing sphere. Without consolidating, without our joint work in this sphere with international, national NGOs, with the government, we cannot effectively pursue our goals. So we need to reduce the time for bureaucratic procedures, for development of all necessary documentations, and we on both national and local levels are ready to take part in the monitoring of available house stock and assist filling of the database, and that will accelerate voiced concerning the possibility of Caritas Ukraine being engaged in the process of inventory check according to law 4080. That would be most topical, because this law is already in effect. We don't need to wait for anything. We need to act right now. So the gramadas that are listening to us today, who are participating, please, you know who to contact, and you can get free of charge technical expertise that you need to fill the database and inspect your internal resources, your housing stock. Viktor Gladchenko, head of the recovery program People in Need. Thank you for invitation. Our minimal program is to add 20 flats to the housing stock, and our maximum program is to create a prototype in 3 gramadas to build the Prozora system, the system of equitable system that will take into account social indicators. We need to activate local government bodies, let them understand that that's a very interesting, very engaging process. So that we need to empower them to engage investment portfolios, work with possible donors and partners. Who else but they know their needs on the local level, they understand their resources, so they need to learn, to get experience, and they need to be ready to work with investors. We understand to build the new housing we need a lot of resources. So this is what we are currently working on. We have challenges, of course, even if we find funding for pilot projects or for prototypes. We face such issues as bureaucratic red tape. After handling bureaucratic processes, we face legal challenges, how to register all this housing stock, how to manage this housing stock, and then finally we face the capacity challenge, because this activity is new for local self-government bodies. They haven't been working in this field for a long time. Currently, they don't even have municipal housing as such. They do not have the ownership. Of course, they don't know how to manage it. So what we are trying to do, we are trying to create a pilot prototype for the local self-government bodies to try their hand at management, at allocation, at looking for people who will be provided with this housing. They need to learn how to support people who need to integrate in the host communities. They need to learn how to make these hosting hromadas the second home for IDPs. So our projects help local hromadas how to create the prototype and how to effectively present it to future potential investors. Thank you. Thank you. Let's thank our panelists for the participation, for the work you're doing today in Ukraine. You're helping our municipalities, our hromadas, our citizens in implementation of their housing rights. And now on the screen you will see our contacts, Housing Institute contact information, and we have half an hour left so that all present could ask questions. Whoever you want to ask, you're welcome with questions. I hope for fruitful discussion. People's Deputy of Ukraine, Pavlo Frolov. Thank you. I'd like to thank for your research. It's very important. It highlights the necessity for as fast as possible implementation of the law 4080 that was supported by our temporary commission. I'd like to thank, we mentioned this law several times here, and it's important to engage in these commissions all organizations that are already working on housing issues, who have the expertise and experience, because if we just give it away to bureaucrats, we will only have Google pictures, or they will just take pictures of these objects without leaving their studies, and then and this is how they're going to do this inventory check. They will do it without leaving the offices. In fact, this inventory needs to be done on the annual basis, but there is no real inventory check. Nobody knows any results. There is no data available. So we're going to really control this issue. The law provides for it, but we as stakeholders need to see what is there in those projects that are currently developed by the Cabinet of Ministers. We need to check the criteria that are going to be specified in these projects, and we have to guarantee that these inspections physically take place, and local communities and local stakeholders need to be engaged in these inventory checks. So, and all the organizations that are present here, these are the stakeholders. They are very important in the practical implementation of these issues. I have a question to the director of the Housing Institute manager. I'd like to see the list of these 710 gramadas. I'm interested to know what gramadas are there. Do we have Kiev and Lviv there? Because to hear that they have zero of housing initiatives, that's horrible to hear. Did you really address all gramadas? Do you mean that some just refuse to have? What is the percentage of refusals that you?
Так, наче працюю. Чудово. Дякую за питання. Насправді, так, стосовно вибірки, ми на
Concerning the selection, we had support of the Ministry of Communities and Territories, and we shared the request with support of the Ministry to all 1,469 gramadas in Ukraine who were obliged to respond according to the legal procedure within 30 days. They had to fill out the form using the link, or if they didn't want to fill out the form, they were obliged to give a written response in paper format. What we got official responses, or any responses as such, from only 710 gramadas, which is 48%. They responded to the request from the ministry. In fact, every gramada that was responded was contacted by phone. We communicated with them personally. They had to appoint a focal point responsible for this survey, and so we communicated with each of them to just to verify, maybe to dig into the numbers that they provided. So if you're asking about the data, it's a huge resource. So I understand that your request is an official request of a people's deputy, parliamentarian. So if you give us such a request, yeah, we will share this information with you and give you the official response. We will provide you this information that reflects the responses to the 58 questions of our survey from 710 gramadas in Ukraine. Any other questions? Welcome. It's not so much a question, but a request. I'm talking about relocated communities. We have more than 3,000 occupied settlements, and we have gramadas that evacuated. I would like to request focus on relocated gramadas which do not have a specific mechanism of any transactions with real estate in host communities. We are talking about almost the whole of Luhansk Oblast and many territories in other oblasts. It's a huge resource of the gramadas who have 100% IDPs. That's just something to draw attention to. It's not a question. Thank you. Решетняк Владислав. I have a question to Yevgen. Could you give us more details about your experience of providing modular houses? You said that you installed more than 200 modular houses. I'd like to understand, are these the houses that are manufactured in Ukraine, or maybe they are supplied from other countries? Do you consider the option of manufacture of such houses on the territory of Ukraine? Thank you. Thank you for your question. Generally, the bidding processes are ongoing, and depending on the value of the bidding process, they have to be international, open to any bidders. And these bidding processes were won. So the tender was awarded to 3 Ukrainian manufacturers. So our requirement was to have a consortium, so our contractor will cover completely the whole procedure from the start to giving keys to the people. They had to provide the whole complex of works, and these are the contracts were awarded to 3 Ukrainian companies one in the east, one the south, one in the north. How about multi-storied buildings? Are there any examples? In this project, these are one-story houses with 35 square meters for families of 3 or 4 people, and extra modules with 35 square meters if the household has more members. The basic model has all the comforts, the facilities, kitchen, bathroom, and extra modules have facilities for children. In fact, that's an absolutely complete and comfortable house, so the household, the family can step in and live there. As for multi-storied houses or multi-flat buildings, what we do with them, we just help people with windows, with replacing the roofs. We're working with them, but only in the context of repairs. Dear participants in the conference room, we still have time. Do you have any questions concerning this study? Maybe you have questions to the panelists who took part. Also, our online participants, you have the possibility to ask questions. It's very important to get feedback from you, and we'll be thankful to you if you look through our study and if you provide feedback and share your impressions, your thoughts, your proposals, which we could take into account with our future work. In our future work, we really hope, and we worked with that hope, that it will not be the study for the sake of the study. It's very important for us to work closely with Remadas, to give specific recommendations, to identify real problems and find solutions together with parliamentarians, with local self-government authorities, with central government. That's why we invited the ministry representative, the representative of the Verkhovna Rada, of the temporary special commission for protecting the rights of IDPs and conflict-affected people, who focus on these issues that we are discussing today. So I really encourage you to engage in the dialogue. We still have time. Anyone willing? Hello, I'm the deputy of Odessa local Rada. I'm thankful for everyone present. Thank you for your Housing Institute, for the research which is very much in demand. I'm very sorry that Odessa Gramada did not provide the data. I think that experience of such big cities as Odessa, more than 1 million population, would be very useful. We know that in Odessa we did not work on any social housing, and we have lots of corrupt schemes, including the schemes that transferred housing stock into private hands, private ownership. I'd like to ask questions and to give a recommendation, because outside the margins of this study is the housing stock which has the status of cultural heritage. We seldom speak about that, we never raise this issue, but we really have cities that are in the list of historical heritage cities, about 100 of them. We understand that ruination is going on in such historical heritage housing stock, so its renovation is extremely difficult, almost blocked, because we do not have the regulatory basis, and the procedures are very bureaucratic, and we cannot have the possibilities to renew quickly this housing stock. So I'd like to, in the future, in your research, you also take into account such housing stock. In Odessa, for example, we have 150 buildings that are already partially destroyed or seriously damaged. These are the part of cultural heritage, and a big part of them is the housing stock. It's not a municipal housing, partially municipal, partially private, but the issue of rehabilitation is a challenge. Concerning privatization, and I'm thankful to our parliamentarians, because we now have this law and we're waiting for the bylaws, but I have the request, in these bylaws, please consolidate the experience of all and bodies and departments that are in charge of cultural heritage, because currently Odessa is doing the inventory check of the historical center, which is part of the UNESCO heritage, and we do not have any understanding how it's going to be done in alignment with the commission which is going to be formed by the military administrations, and then they do not look into these issues. So we are all working in our own directions without the common basis, without this synergy that is important for our efforts, and that needs discussion as well. It's also not a question, it's more like a request or recommendation. I think that the cultural heritage and renovation of such housing stock needs a separate study in Ukraine, and on the basis of such study we could give recommendations to the government on introducing corresponding changes to the effective legislation, because this is really a gap. Thank you. A question from expert community. In the process of your study and communication with Hromadas, you identified that strategies and concepts are absent. Was there any initiative on the part of the Hromadas regarding pilot projects and pilot regions? Were they interested in creating such a pilot strategy on the local level? In fact, the 13 Hromadas that we presented today, these Hromadas showed the broad context willingness to cooperate, to engage in the housing sector initiatives in various directions. We have representatives of such Hromadas here. We would like the representatives to confirm their interest in such engagement. And besides those Hromadas that we talked about, there were several other Hromadas who appealed to us, who contacted us. For example, Hromada from Lviv, they also contacted us and displayed their interest in such work. So grassroots initiatives are starting to come from Hromadas of various levels, including big and small ones, and that is praiseworthy, that deserves respect. And within the scope of our work, we appeal to all Hromadas. We want to encourage you to contact us, and we as a Housing Institute are ready to support such initiatives. We are ready to facilitate the development of local strategies and concepts, because so far we do not have the state strategy, so maybe we should be talking about the concepts, and then the concepts will develop into local strategies after we have the national strategy. So you see our context, and we will be grateful for your initiative. We'll always be ready to support it. My name is Anatoly Grabovsky. I represent Makarev Hromada. I'm deputy head of the Hromada. I'd like to confirm that our Hromadas are interested in such project. I don't have a question, it's just a comment. I'd like to thank you for such difficult circumstances and such harsh conflict when our enemies are doing their best to devastate, to eliminate the housing, and you are working on such things, so that's great. Our Hromadas are limited in funds. It's not just finance, it's just staffing resources. We do not have specialists who could develop concepts and strategies, projects in the housing sphere. So we really need advocacy in this context. We need advice, we need analytical support. It's very important because everything starts from the fundamental data, from the inputs, and we don't have them. We are trying to learn. We are doing what we can. We are very thankful to our parliamentarians for adopting the law that will oblige all Hromadas to start working on inventory check. And you know, Hromadas did not see any political advantage in inventory checks, so that's why there are lots of ownerless property, abandoned housing that you can see in our villages and settlements. But all these objects have great potential because they are already there, they're in place, they're already integrated. They have the water supply, they have electricity, they have the roofs, we already have the social infrastructure, schools, medical facilities, and settlements really require this housing stock. So because it's important for them to be able to recruit doctors, teachers who are not currently available in rural areas. We cannot offer these people high salaries. How can we attract people to come and work in village schools and medical facilities? So the solution of the housing problem would be a solution that could attract qualified personnel. And due to war, there are specialists who relocated from close to contact line territories, and they are looking for employment, they are looking for new jobs as a teacher, as a doctor. But gramadas like ours, we cannot host them because we can't give them the housing, because our settlements are often far away from transport infrastructure. That's why the work we are talking about would give a lot of advantages. We would have the additional motivation to attract human resources. We could improve the infrastructure of our settlements. We could attract investors. So if the colleagues allow me, I'd like to express our interest on behalf of all gramadas in your support, and gramadas can engage with their own resources, but we really have to jointly develop the strategic documents so that we make this process as optimal and rational and effective as possible. Please, I want to assure you that our gramadas want to be reliable partners for our international donors, for UNHCR, Caritas, and for all other international organizations. We're working with them. We have experience of collaboration. I'd like to say that we guarantee that we are going to be a reliable partner in the process. Thank you for this optimistic note. I'd like to confirm that the Housing Institute is ready to engage in supporting Makarev Gramada, and I call on all international donors and partners present here to communicate, maybe separately, and think about developing municipal housing in the gramadas that we listed today, in other gramadas that you've been cooperating with.
Like, we had unreasonable expectation from them for at least two reasons. Like, one is like the local government reform happened right before the war started. So before the amalgamation, the gramadas were very small, and at that size, it couldn't be expected that they would be getting into this kind of complex thing, because they are really small. But by the time they got amalgamated, they had the power and the skill. Then the war started. They got into the wartime reality. So I think we have to give them the time and space to have these capacities and kind of thing. So this is one thing. The second thing also about procedural compliance and other kind of stuff, there is also sometimes we treat them unfairly, because we have never given them the standards. We have never given them the goalpost that for a housing program to implement, you have to have these and these and these standards complied with, right? So without giving them the standard, we judge them that whether they have complied, because they never had the goalpost. So I think setting the goalpost itself is very valuable, so that the gramadas knows what is the goalpost, what to meet, and we also know how to judge them. Okay, thank you.
Dear participants, I'd like to thank everyone for participation in our event. So we are drawing to an end. If you still have any questions about the study, please contact us. You have QR codes of our social networks, my personal phone number in Messenger. We have our office email. If you have any questions, if you have any feedback, comments, we'll be happy to communicate with you. We cannot cover all issues in the format of this event, so we'll be happy to have separate events and discussions. I'd like to thank our authors team who worked on this study, I'd like to thank Gramadas, central government authorities, and all stakeholders engaged in this project. Thank you all for participation.